Hey, welcome back, true crime fans, to For Criming Out Loud and our bedtime series called Crime Me to Sleep. We have been reading While Idaho Slept, and this is the 11th episode. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you can go into the playlists and start any of the true crime books that we've covered from the very beginning. Let's get into episode 11 of While Idaho Slept. Part 10, Chapter 50. It was still Christmas break when news of Brian Kohberger's arrest in connection with the King Road homicides hit the national headlines. Most students were at home with their families preparing for New Year's Eve when they heard of the alleged perpetrator's capture. There was a general sense of relief and also astonishment as they learned more about Kohberger, the PhD candidate in criminology, who had allegedly lurked among them for weeks after the killings. In just a few days, students would start to return to the University of Idaho campus. Some would feel comfortable walking to classes again, while others, no matter that the suspect had been caught, would remain frightened. They would barely leave their dormitories at first, and there would be an uptick in food orders from the, quote, starship fleet, unquote, of robots on campus. 15 gleaming white, six-wheeled, autonomous containers capable of navigating the U of I sidewalks and wooded pathways through winter weather. On the morning of January 4th, Kohberger was loaded by Pennsylvania State Police into a single-engine, fixed-wing aircraft that seated 11. The plane departed and took a northern route across the country. It landed twice to refuel, and by the evening, the plane was wheels down and the state police were ready to transfer their cargo. Kohberger's transport was met by Idaho State Police officers at the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport, just across the border in Washington state. It was long past dark when Kohberger, in handcuffs and shackles, was led across the tarmac to a caravan of vehicles. He was then driven back into Idaho and booked into the 37-inmate Latah County Jail. He was kept out of the general population for his safety and the safety of others, and there were plans in place to accommodate his strict vegan diet, which he had reportedly turned to years earlier while searching for a remedy to his visual snow symptoms. Meanwhile, the Idaho State Police were continuing to process the evidence taken from Brian Kohberger's apartment, identifying items in a variety of post-search documents, including evidence logs, chemical testing logs, and narrative reports written by law enforcement personnel. From two closets on the north wall of the entryway, they had retrieved a single black nitrile-type glove, receipts from Marshall's and Walmart, the dust container from Kohberger's inexpensive Bissell Power Force vacuum, and possible hair strands from the head of a broom. From under the computer pad on Brian Kohberger's desk, they had retrieved a possible animal hair strand, which was notable because Kohberger had no pets. Crime scene analysts also had removed a possible human hair from the wall of his shower and multiple hairs from inside of the shower drain. From Kohberger's kitchen, according to chemical testing logs, they removed a white towel with a diluted, irregular reddish-brown stain. There were multiple other items with similarly colored stains in the kitchen, including on the counter, inside a drawer, on a screwdriver, and a bottle of Ajax soap, along the back of the countertop microwave, and on two switches behind the sink. Other reddish-brown stains appeared inside and outside 2 bedroom closet doors and between the fibers on a towel found on a nearby stool. Multiple irregular red stains were found on the exterior of the bedroom door, and red-brown stains were found in the bedroom door jamb, along both the interior and exterior of the bathroom door, and within the bathroom itself, including along the edges of the medicine cabinet, wooden vanity countertop and cabinets, and door jamb to the separate toilet room within the bathroom. There was a brownish-colored stain on the underside of a rug beneath the coffee table, and a similar stain on the carpeting beneath the rug. There were 2 additional reddish-brown stains on an uncased pillow atop Koberger's bed. The largest stain immediately tested positive for blood, as did an irregular-looking brown drip on the mattress cover. Out in the world, reaction to Koberger's arrest was dominating coffee shop talk. And inside the Latah County Jail, in the basement of the courthouse, Brian Koberger was held in solitary confinement cell that a previous inmate had said was too short for a 6-foot person to remain comfortable inside. The bed was beside the toilet, and if he slept with his head in that direction, the smell would be foul. If he slept with his head toward the bars, the corridor lights would hit his face. Mounted cameras were trained into the cells, none of which were in good condition, according to the ex-inmate, Corey Clem. The paint is all chipped off. It's rusty. The drains are full of nasty filth. It's mildewy in there. The ceilings are extremely short, Clem told News Nation. It's just a small, claustrophobic metal box. It's not fun. Koberger was the only person known to be housed in the maximum security holding area at the time. He was alone with his thoughts, although his Tapatalk ruminations from years earlier offered clues to what they might have been. And here's a long excerpt from the Tapatalk. I've had this horrible depersonalization go on in my life for almost 2 years. I often find myself making simple human interactions, but it's as if I'm playing a role game. A role-playing game, yeah. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. I am starting to view everyone as this. Everything I have ever done makes no sense. How did things get this way? How am I wearing this shirt? And who decided that humans shall wear shirts like this? Are we all just advanced animals with possession? Or is there more that I can't see? I can't connect. I view everything as if I was playing Oblivion, pointless and full of nothing, out of reality. As my family group hugs and celebrates, I am stuck in this void of nothing, feeling completely no emotion, feeling nothing. I feel dirty, like there is dirt inside of my head, my mind. I am always dizzy and confused. I am intelligent, but I feel the opposite. I say things I don't mean. As I hug my family, I look into their faces. I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less. It is like I have severe brain damage. I am stuck in the depths of my mind where I have to constantly battle my demons. Am I here or am I fake? I feel myself slipping away. I hear screams faintly, but I constantly battle away from it. I think about my father, what a good man he is, how I treat him like dirt because I have this condition and I can't take it. Now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live. I remember when I was 15, I would wander alone at 2 a.m. Everything was so generic. Nowhere felt like home. I saw things that were not there, a different reality. I felt eerie and alone. I died during those nights. I felt like a criminal, but where was my record? Chapter 51. In a small courtroom in Latah County, Brian Kohberger made his first court appearance on January 5th, one day after returning to Idaho. He was brought in without cuffs. He wore an orange jumper with the word prisoner across his back in black lettering. He was cleanly shaven, but the hairs along the back of his neck had grown unkempt while in jail. Kohberger sat beside his court-appointed public defender, Ann Taylor, who was also chief of the nearby Kootenai County Public Defender's Office. Taylor was one of only a handful of Idaho public defenders qualified to represent clients in death penalty cases. That was important, since the prosecution would likely seek that sentence with a guilty verdict. Not only was the death penalty legal in Idaho, but Idaho would soon become one of only 5 states to authorize death by firing squad in cases where nitrogen, hypoxia, lethal injection, and electrocution were held unconstitutional or otherwise unavailable. Taylor had periodically defended Xana Kernodle's mom against her drug charges. Now she was defending the man accused of being Xana's killer. The judge, Megan Marshall, apprised Kohberger of the charges against him, which included unlawful entry into the King Road residence and 4 felony counts of murder in the first degree for premeditatedly causing the deaths of Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin by stabbing. Marshall's face showed no emotion as she addressed Kohberger. The maximum penalty for this offense, if you were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life. Do you understand? Judge Marshall asked after each of the murder charges were read aloud. Yes, Kohberger said each time, leaning into the desk-mounted microphone before him. After the charges had been read, Marshall added, "Would you like to represent yourself, hire a lawyer, or see if you qualify for court-appointed counsel?" "I have court-appointed counsel," Kohberger told her into his microphone, acknowledging Ann Taylor's presence beside him. "Court has reviewed your application for an attorney at public expense," Judge Marshall told him. "I do find that you are indigent and do qualify for court-appointed counsel. I will appoint Miss Taylor to represent you in this case." Kohberger was denied bail and remanded to the state custody until a status hearing could be held 1 week later to decide on a timeline for his trial. He was also served with a no-contact order, preventing him from attempting to communicate with Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk, or the family members of the King Road homicide victims. Kohberger had nodded politely and appeared calm throughout the proceedings. On January 12th, he was again brought into Judge Marshall's courtroom. He was again clean-shaven, only today there were fresh cuts on his face from his jail-issue razor. They looked like cat scratches across his jawline. His hair looked shiny as if recently washed. Cameras from multiple national networks were filming him from the public gallery in the back. In keeping with the sometimes perplexing nature of the American court system, the purpose of the day's status hearing was to determine the future dates of a required preliminary hearing. In layman's shorthand, whereas the previous week was about reading Kohberger his charges, this week was about figuring out when or if he would face them. Under his right to a speedy trial, designed so that people accused of a crime don't endlessly languish in jail without proof of their guilt, Kohberger would be allowed a preliminary hearing within 14 days of this January 12th court appearance. At that time, another judge would review evidence provided by the prosecution and defense and possibly hear from witnesses. A preliminary hearing is, in a sense, like a mini-trial, like a teaser to a movie, in which an appointed judge can get a sense of how a case might play out and decide whether there is sufficient evidence to move forward or if charges should be dropped altogether. It was also Kohberger's prerogative to waive his right to a speedy trial and remain in jail while his attorney made preparations. In that case, a preliminary hearing could be set many months out. This is often a good strategy when a defendant is facing pretty serious charges, since it gives legal teams more time to build a defense. Ann Taylor stood before the judge and requested such an extension. "We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June," she said. Mr. Kohberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case. Discovery was the term used for the prosecution's evidence against her client. The prosecutor, Bill Thompson, stood up in agreement, his long white beard reaching down to his tie. "The state has no objection to that, Your Honor." Kohberger's next court date was set for June 26th, over 5 months away. He was removed from the courtroom by a sheriff's deputy gripping his left arm. Judge Marshall had also issued a gag order preventing public discussion of the case by any member of law enforcement or the court system, or any other entity associated with the case, including family members of the victims and their representatives. In essence, due to the intense media interest in the King Road homicides, Judge Marshall was shutting out the media going forward in order to maintain the integrity of the case and to ensure an unbiased jury should the case go to trial. The media wasn't happy, as their sources who had been close to the investigation, such as cops in the Moscow PD, would dry up under the threat of legal action by the state of Idaho. A contingent of dozens of media outlets unsuccessfully sued to remove the gag order. So did Kaylee's father, Steve Gonzalez, who wanted to keep his daughter's story alive in the press, and who wanted to see that Kohberger got what was coming to him. "Justice is when you leave the planet," he told News Nation, explaining why he thought his daughter's killer should be sentenced to death. "If you want to play God's role, you're going to have to go answer to him." Ironically, the opinion piece decrying the death penalty that Mary Ann Kohberger had written for the Pocono Record 15 years earlier now seemed like a weird foreshadowing of her own deepest fear, losing her son. "State-sanctified murder is still just that," Mary Ann wrote. Murder. Chapter 52. The media didn't know the totality of the evidence against Kohberger. All anybody outside of law enforcement could know for certain was what the probable cause affidavit for Kohberger's arrest had spelled out. The affidavit was the multi-page document used to prove just enough evidence to get a judge to sign off on a warrant to take Kohberger into custody in Pennsylvania. It didn't have to list all of the evidence, only enough for probable cause, the current standard for an arrest. The affidavit emphasized Koberger's alleged familial DNA found on the K-bar knife sheath at the King Road crime scene, his white Hyundai caught on security cameras near the scene at the approximate time of the murders, and his cell phone pinging the tower servicing the King Road residence at the same time. It had also noted Koberger's cell pinging there late at night a dozen times previously, as if he had been stalking the victims in the months leading up to their murders. And Koberger's interest in law enforcement and criminology studies were mentioned, along with his recently posted Reddit survey asking criminals about their states of mind, which to the media now looked like a bid for tips of the trade, not academic research. Then there was Dylan Mortenson's statement about seeing a masked man who fit Koberger's general description. The man she saw was Caucasian, roughly Koberger's height and build, and with bushy eyebrows that she had remembered from the small facial area that remained exposed. While Koberger's eyebrows were not much bushier than those of an average man of his age, his brow itself was prominent. He fit the description. After his arrest and subsequent jailing in Idaho, the probable cause affidavit was released under public information laws. With the gag order in place, the affidavit was the next best thing for the media to scour. To most, Koberger looked like a guy who would go to his death in prison. Many of the criminal defense attorneys weighing in publicly, however, saw gaping holes in what the probable cause affidavit had presented. Mark Garagos was one of those attorneys who saw ways for Koberger's team to argue that some of the evidence was insignificant. Garagos had represented celebrity clients including Michael Jackson, Winona Ryder, NBA star Scottie Pippen, and former NFL player Colin Kaepernick, along with a slew of people facing charges of murder or attempted murder, including UFC star Cain Velasquez, who, several months before the King Road murders, shot into a car of people driving away with a man who had been accused of molesting Velasquez's young relative. According to Garagos, who appeared on TV in the days after Koberger's arrest, the probable cause affidavit was flimsy at best. It had holes you could drive a Mack truck through, Garagos said. He was joined on one network by Marcia Clark, famously the lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson murder trial. I can't tell you the number of murder cases where the prosecution's cell phone evidence ended up exonerating my client, as opposed to showing that he was guilty, Garagos said. As I am sitting right here, I could be using my phone, and it could be pinging on the two towers 12 miles away from each other, just by virtue of the amount of traffic on one of the towers. Cell phone tower evidence was a good tool to approximate distance, Garagos said, but Koberger could just as easily have been a mile away from the King Road residence as 10 feet. He did not have to be driving on King Road on the dozens of occasions previous to the homicides to have pinged the tower that serviced it. Garagos was additionally suspicious of the affidavit's argument that Koberger, turning off his cell phone around the time of the murders, somehow implied that he was guilty. There were many reasons a phone could be turned off, and it was the prosecution's burden to prove Koberger's guilt, not implying it. If the defense offered a believable alternative reason for his phone being turned off, a jury would, by instruction of the judge, have to discredit the prosecution's previous speculations. You gotta pick the one that points toward innocence, Garagos said, meaning that two viable options for Koberger's behavior should, by law, lead to a finding of not guilty in the face of reasonable doubt, which is the constitutional standard jurors are supposed to adhere to. I agree, Marcia Clark said, and she was anything but light on crime, as they say. In fact, she had spent over 50 years dedicated to prosecuting and studying it. Garagos later appeared on News Nation beside Jim Clemente, a former New York City prosecutor and FBI profiler. The two engaged in a point-counterpoint debate about the strength of the probable cause affidavit, primarily addressing the cellular data tracking of Kohberger and the touch DNA on the K-bar sheath. The DNA evidence is extremely strong, Clemente said. Coupled with the other circumstantial type evidence they have listed in this affidavit, it certainly points to one person, and that person is in custody right now. Garagos was not so certain. In his time as a defense attorney, he had seen too many suspects charged with crimes they hadn't committed. Nowadays, probable cause is my client breathing? He joked about what he believed to be the loosening of protocols for charging suspected criminals. What they found was a suspect profile on the sheath. We don't know where the sheath was specifically. We don't know how it got there. He was insinuating that the existence of the sheath in the King Road residence was not the same as having proof that Brian Kohberger had entered the residence, let alone committed the 4 murders. A good defense attorney could argue that somebody else had left behind the sheath, or that Kohberger had been in the residence on another occasion with the sheath, but not on the occasion of the murders, or even that he had been in the residence without the sheath on another occasion, and that his DNA had been left behind, and the sheath had inadvertently been contaminated by it. What if Kohberger had been stalking the victims but hadn't killed them? What if his reason for being in the area on 12 previous occasions was that he had had a friend in the nearby apartments? When convicting a suspect of murder, the law required proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and without the murder weapon or more than just a single touch of DNA on a piece of leather, if that was the only physical evidence the police had gathered from the King Road crime scene, then the case could be successfully challenged, Garagos believed. He continued to explain that there was room to explore human error as well, also database error in the comparison between Kohberger's father's DNA to his own. They rummaged through the trash. They found some DNA, Garagos said with a grin. It was easy to see where he was going with this. Anything could have been contaminated by anything else in the trash. If the DNA evidence from either the garbage bin or the knife sheath was too degraded a sample, it could be discredited in court. And then, where would the prosecution's case be? So far as anybody in the public knew, that single trace of DNA was the only biological evidence pointing to Kohberger's guilt. The rest was circumstantial, and the defense could argue many things. He was a nut, obsessed, a stalker, he was bad, but he didn't kill those kids. Garagos wasn't alone in pointing out additional flaws in the DNA evidence. The DNA is nice to have, former CIA officer Tracy Walder said. It puts him at the scene of the crime, but it doesn't put him at the scene of the crime on that day and around that time. Then she added, this is a hole that can be poked in the prosecution's case. Kohberger's public defender seemed ready to start enlarging that hole and brought in a second attorney to assist with the case. What nobody in the public knew, because the information hadn't been released yet, was that a DNA swab taken from inside Brian Kohberger's cheek after his arrest was a statistical match for the DNA that had been found on the knife sheath the perpetrator had left behind. It had apparently been his father's DNA that allowed for Kohberger to be taken into custody, but it looked like his own DNA would keep him there. Thank you for listening to episode 11 of While Idaho Slept. If you're enjoying this bedtime book series so far, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Also, if there's a true crime book that you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below. I'd appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate your support in this series, Crime Me to Sleep. Until next time, good night.